So I wanted to go over my rig in terms of my pedals and my amp modeler. One of the things that makes guitar such a popular instrument is you can use standard techniques to play the instrument, but because of the amount of effects that are available, you can create a completely new sound that has never been heard before. So that's not really my goal. I wanted to have a sound in terms of tone and pedals that I felt best represented me, what sounds I like, and how I wanted to communicate through music. So each one of these pedals has a different function. And I don't want to be laborious about it, but I wanted to briefly explain why I chose these pedals and what function they'll have. So this typically is not a very exciting pedal, but it's very important. It's the tuner and the buffer. So a tuner obviously is going to tune the instrument, which is why it's up first in the chain. So there's not going to be anything like distortion that is going to mess with the outcome of the tuning. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. But what's more, well, not more important, but what is subtly very important is this also acts as a buffer, and not every tuner has a buffer. So the Polytune by TC Electronic, I think it's TC Electronic, is useful because the buffer that's built inside of it will boost the signal to give a stronger quality signal. Okay. And because I have so many cables running from my guitar to each one of the pedals to the audio interface that goes into the computer, it's important that I have a buffered signal so that the quality is maintained throughout the signal chain. So next in line, this is it's not a Univibe, but it's a Univibe style pedal. And what I like about this is the Dunlop Rotovibe, is that it can do a couple different effects. It can do a vibrato effect, which kind of warps the pitch in the sound, or a chorus effect, which generally is it. In general, a chorus type of effect will take the original signal, detune some of it slightly, and maybe add, I don't say a little delay, but it makes it so it sounds like it can sound like there's more than one track happening at the same time. So it can thicken up a sound, or it can add some motion to the sound. Okay. Since this is primarily a Univibe pedal, what it's going to do is kind of, depending on the setting and how intense it is, it can create this watery effect that makes the sound like it's underwater. And Jimi Hendrix really popularized this sound back in the late 60s and early 70s, particularly on the song Machine Gun. So the reason I put this in my effect loop is, I don't say effect loop, in my effects chain, is I want that psychedelic sound. I want to be able to use those psychedelic type of effects that were prominent in the late 60s, early 70s, and add some texture that way through those types of pedals. And what's nice about this pedal is if you roll back the intensity or change some of the settings, it can also function as a light phaser pedal, or, as I mentioned earlier, a chorus or vibrato. This is a volume pedal. I originally got it because I played in my church's worship team, and being able to do volume swells really helps with worship music because it creates a very subtle ambient effect that can be very calming and can also um, draw the congregation into Christ's presence. So that specific sound is why I bought this pedal, is to have that specific effect in church during worship music. Outside of worship music, though, I do value this. Number one, well, in addition, if you're in a live setting and you have a pedal like this on your board, you can very easily drop the sound out if you need to. Okay, you can also do it with a tuner by stepping on this button, and that will cut off the sound. But I always thought it was nice to be able to roll back the volume with a foot pedal, and it's sort of like a check and balance. If this button were accidentally to get pressed, or something would happen while the pastor was talking, you don't want a loud clang of a guitar or feedback from one of the effects pedals to ring out in the church. So I found that having this additional volume pedal was a good check and balance. Okay, but lastly, you can use volume swells outside of that setting if you're doing ambient music, or if you want to phase in, or I should say fade in, a distortion effect. That can be a volume pedal can do that for you too. All right, so this right here is the centerpiece of my distorted tone, the EHX Electro Harmonics Op Amp Big Muff. All right, this pedal has been used, this type of pedal, I should say, has been used on so many hard rock records. It's difficult to list them all, but I mean, everything from straight hard rock to doom metal to alternative metal in the 90s. A lot of or even pop music. I can think of some examples like If It Makes You Happy by Sheryl Crow. That sound, maybe they weren't using a big muff pedal, but the sound of the distorted guitar in that song is at least reminiscent of a big muff. So countless records have used this. So if you like this sound, there's all kinds of flavors for you. This was the version 4 and version 5 in the late 70s that had largely been forgotten until Billy Corgan popularized it with the release of Smashing Pumpkins' Siamese Dream. And I didn't pick this just to rip off that album. It didn't make sense to me at the time when I was growing up, but I always felt like that sound was me. It was like an expression of my, I don't know, not just personality, but myself. Okay, and it's difficult to put that into words unless you've experienced it. I remember reading that Metallica's Kirk Hammett said that the wah pedal was an expression of his personality, and that's why he liked to use it so much. For me, this tone is a sort of a representation of my personality that I want to get across. Okay. It also is really great for creating a dense sound in the studio, a dense, layered, distorted effect. Above it is what I'm going to use for my lead tone. This is called a fuzz octave pedal. It's the Electro Harmonics Octavix pedal. And what this can do is cut across a lot of heavy distortion in the rhythm part with a big searing lead. So again, Jimi Hendrix in the late 60s, particularly, I'm thinking of the album, just the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Billy Corgan in the early 90s on a lot of his stuff uses a fuzz octave, but again, Siamese Dream really makes good use of this pedal. So you can see that so far a lot of what I'm trying to do has been heavily influenced by the psychedelia of the late 60s and the alternative rock, hard rock, grunge sound of the early 90s. Okay. So this is called a modulation effect. I suppose the Univibe would also be in this category, but due to the nature of the pedal. It goes earlier in the chain. I picked this because Joyo pedals do a good job and they're inexpensive. I didn't want a very elaborate tremolo pedal. I just wanted something that would add some subtle movement to a rhythm part. This can also be cranked up really loud, or not loudly, but with a high degree of intensity to make some really just kind of out there strange effects. And I'm going to put some links in the description of this video if you'd like more information on these pedals and what they can do. I'll put a link to a demo that I found to be very helpful. But what this will do, a tremolo pedal will do, is it will, I have it to a subtle setting, but it's going to bring the volume of the guitar in and out with like a subtle wave. So that'll add some movement to the sound and add some interest to the sound. Next up, we've got the Boss DD20 Giga Delay. This is useful for a lot of things, from psychedelic, feedback-oriented, reverse swell type of effects that can be used both in rock music and in ambient music. I'm thinking of a song by the Beatles. They did a solo where they reversed the track. I wish I could remember what it was called, but this is an example again of the psychedelic sort of use of this kind of pedal. But you can get really out there with the twist effect. It sounds like, I don't know if it's an engine or a computer or something, but ramping out very quickly. And you can also simulate different kinds of delay. For example, the tape delay was something that was used early on. It sounds more organic, and I think it sounds darker, if I remember correctly. The standard mode is just a digital delay. Analog has its own sound, and you can see the reverse setting is down here, and the modulate setting will also warp the sound, or maybe that's just the warp setting. But either way, all these do something to alter the sound differently and have a lot of different uses. At bare minimum, if you're going to use a delay pedal, it can really help with, I'm going to say, sort of ambient ringing lead tones, like an arpeggiated chord that you just let ring. And what the delay does is it takes your whatever note you hit and repeats it slowly into the background until it goes silent again. So it's good for those arpeggiated tones, but it's also good for solos, to thicken up a solo, to make it sound bigger, and to make it have more sustain. Okay, so in terms of effects pedals, this is the last effect pedal that that's gonna be a regular part of the board. This is the Walrus Audio Slow pedal, and this is definitely a shoegaze and ambient connoisseur's dream. It makes these huge washes of sound. If you step on the sustain pedal, you can hold a chord or a note indefinitely and just play over it. You can, in a live situation, you could set it up as the background sort of, I don't want to call it wallpaper, but the backdrop of whatever you're going to play over top of it. Mostly it's used for these huge ambient swell pieces. Again, this is going to fit into the psychedelia and the ambient sound that I'm going for. Okay.